She raised their twin sons alone for 3 years, until the man who abandoned her showed up at the school gates, and everything changed. Julia had woken that morning feeling strangely at peace, despite the weight of everything she was carrying inside her, the fears, the uncertainty, and the quiet flutter of life growing beneath her ribs. It was early, sunlight barely stretching through the thin curtains of their small apartment. Tyler had made coffee before dawn and kissed her on the forehead while she was still half asleep, promising he would be back soon. She believed him. There was no reason not to. Until she walked into the kitchen. On the table was a single white envelope with her name on it. Nothing else. Her stomach sank before she even opened it, as if her body understood before her mind could process it. The handwriting was unmistakably his. She sat slowly, fingers trembling as she unfolded the note. The words were few, but sharp like glass. I'm sorry. I'm not ready. Leaving is the best thing I can do for all of us. Please don't look for me. The rest of the world became a dull echo. She could hear the ticking of the clock, the hum of the fridge, but it felt like none of it belonged to her anymore. Her heart pounded so loudly it seemed to fill the room. She stared at the paper, rereading the words over and over, hoping they would change, that maybe she had misunderstood. But they remained the same, brutal in their simplicity. She was 3 months pregnant with his children. And now, she was alone. The following hours passed in a haze. Julia couldn't cry, not yet. Instead, she moved on autopilot, putting the note away in the drawer, washing the coffee cup he had used for the last time, straightening the pillows on the couch. Everything he had touched was still there, and somehow that made it worse. His presence was everywhere, and yet he was gone. Just like that. No argument. No warning. Only silence and a piece of paper. As the sky turned from morning gold to a pale gray, Julia finally let herself collapse into the corner of the couch. She wrapped her arms around her growing belly, the only part of him he hadn't taken. It was there, alive and real, reminding her that her fight wasn't over. If anything, it had only just begun. The betrayal wasn't just abandonment, it was the realization that love, no matter how deep it seemed, could be overpowered by fear. Tyler hadn't just walked away from her. He had walked away from the life they had created together, from the tiny heartbeats that she had already grown to love more than anything else in the world. She whispered to them then, her voice low and shaking, "It's just us now. But I promise, I'll never leave you." And though her world had shattered in an instant, a new kind of strength began to take root. Not the kind born of rage, but of fierce devotion. She didn't know how she'd manage the doctor appointments alone, or pay rent next month, or face labor with no hand to hold, but she would. Because those 2 lives growing inside her deserved everything she had left to give. And so, even as the pain carved itself into her chest, Julia rose from the couch, dried her face, and began to plan the rest of her life without him. The weeks that followed were a blur of survival. Julia worked long shifts at a small diner on the edge of town, pouring coffee for tired truck drivers and cleaning up after customers who barely noticed the growing weight of her belly. She had stopped expecting kindness. Each night when she returned home, her feet swollen and her back aching, she would drop her bag by the door, heat up whatever leftovers she could find, and sit in the quiet, her hands resting protectively on the curve of her stomach. Sometimes she would speak to her unborn boys, telling them about the world they were about to enter, not sugarcoating it, but not making it sound too cruel either. She told them about the stars, the rain, the sound of music drifting from windows in summer. She didn't talk about Tyler. Not anymore. At 7 months pregnant, her landlord threatened eviction. Julia had fallen behind on rent and the little savings she had tucked away for emergencies were nearly gone. She swallowed her pride and took a second job cleaning offices at night. The exhaustion was relentless, but her determination burned stronger. Every time she thought of quitting, she imagined 2 sets of tiny feet learning to walk, two sleepy faces calling her mommy, and that kept her going. Her dreams became smaller, simpler: a safe home, clean clothes for the babies, enough food to keep them healthy. Love would have to be the currency for everything else. She gave birth in a public hospital room under bright, sterile lights. There was no one in the waiting room. No one holding her hand. No familiar voice telling her she could do it. But she did. Through screams and sweat and tears, she brought two beautiful boys into the world, Liam and Lucas, identical in every way, with soft brown hair and piercing blue eyes that made her heart ache. She had chosen the names months ago, quietly, without telling anyone, holding them like secrets between herself and the universe. When she held them against her chest for the first time, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, a quiet kind of triumph. She had done it. Without help. Without him. The early months of motherhood were brutal. She slept in broken increments, often with one baby in her arms and the other in a carrier strapped to her chest. Diapers, feedings, fevers, colic, it all came at once, and Julia faced it with the resilience of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to protect. Sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, she would cry silently into a burp cloth, overwhelmed and aching for rest, but never for pity. Her strength didn't come from confidence. It came from necessity. Neighbors began to notice her quiet persistence. An older woman across the hall occasionally brought soup or watched the boys for an hour while Julia ran errands. A cashier at the grocery store started giving her discounts when she could. These small acts didn't fix everything, but they reminded Julia that not all people ran when things got hard. Still, she never told them about Tyler. To everyone else, she was just a young single mother doing her best. That was enough. The boys grew quickly. Their personalities began to show in small bursts. Liam was calmer, often watching the world with a serious gaze, while Lucas was wild from the start, always kicking or grabbing at something. They shared a crib, then a mattress, often falling asleep holding each other's hands. Julia would watch them from the doorway, the ache in her chest deep and complicated. Sometimes she would wonder what Tyler would think if he saw them. If he would recognize himself in their laugh, their walk, their eyes. But most nights, she just kissed them goodnight, turned out the light, and whispered promises she had no idea how she would keep. Julia didn't have time to miss what was lost. Her hands were always full, of bottles, of laundry, of two little boys who were slowly becoming her entire world. She had no room for regret. Only movement. Only forward. And even though her life had become a series of hard choices and sleepless nights, she had never been more certain of who she was. She was their mother. And that was enough. 3 years passed like a slow-burning storm. Some days were calm, others were a chaos of spilled cereal, fevers, daycare drop-offs, and silent tears in the shower, but Julia kept moving forward with the kind of determination that didn't require applause. She had stopped measuring time in weeks or months. Her calendar was filled with scribbled doctor appointments, playdates with neighbors' children, and the occasional job interview that offered more disappointment than hope. But the boys, Liam and Lucas, were thriving. They were bright, affectionate, and endlessly curious. They spoke in their own kind of twin language, understood each other's moods without words, and often refused to be separated even for a minute. Julia would sit back sometimes, exhausted and overwhelmed, watching them build pillow forts or chase each other barefoot through the living room, and feel this quiet ache, equal parts joy and guilt. Joy because they were her entire universe, and guilt because deep down she knew they deserved more than what she could offer. The apartment was still small and the furniture still second-hand, but it had warmth now. The walls were covered in crayon drawings, school crafts, and a dozen handprints in paint from a messy Saturday art project that had left stains on the floor. Julia's bedroom doubled as a laundry room, her mattress was on the floor, and most of her clothes had spit-up stains or frayed sleeves, but she no longer cared about appearances. Her world was built on love and grit, not luxury. One Saturday afternoon in early spring, she took the boys to the park. It had become their weekend ritual. Julia would pack peanut butter sandwiches and juice boxes, and they'd spend hours chasing ducks, feeding birds, or lying on the grass pointing at clouds. That day, the park was crowded. Families gathered under trees with picnic baskets, kids shrieked as they ran through fountains, and a street musician played soft jazz near the fountain. Julia sat on a bench with a book in her lap, barely reading, keeping one eye on the twins who were busy collecting sticks and racing each other up a small hill. That was when it happened. She didn't notice him at first. He had been standing near the fountain, watching the boys with a look of stunned recognition. When Julia finally turned her head and saw him, the air seemed to leave her lungs. Tyler. He looked older but not in a worn-out way. His face was more defined, his expression more grounded. His brown hair was slightly longer, brushed back neatly, and his pale blue eyes, those eyes that used to look through her and into her, were fixed now, wide with disbelief. For a moment, neither of them moved. He took one tentative step forward. She stood slowly, instinctively stepping in front of her children, her body tense with protective energy. "Julia," he said, his voice hoarse, almost like he didn't believe she was real. She couldn't speak. The world around her faded into background noise. Liam and Lucas ran up behind her, holding hands, laughing about something. The moment Tyler saw them, really saw them, his knees buckled slightly. The resemblance was undeniable. Brown hair, his exact shade. Those same piercing blue eyes. It hit him like a wave. She didn't have to say a word. For the first time in 3 years, Julia felt her past collide with her present. She saw every night she had cried herself to sleep, every diaper changed alone, every fear and victory she had carried without him. And now he was here, standing in the middle of a park like a ghost who had found his way back too late. He crouched down slowly, eyes filling with tears as he looked at the boys. "Are they?" he whispered, voice breaking. Julia nodded stiffly, her throat tight. Liam looked up at her, then back at Tyler. "Who's that, Mommy?" Lucas asked, curiosity sparkling in his voice. She swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. "That's someone I used to know," she said carefully. Tyler stood back up, looking devastated but not defensive. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear, Julia, I didn't know you had them." She gave a short laugh, bitter but calm. "You didn't even ask. You just left." Silence hung between them, heavy with things that couldn't be undone. But there was no screaming. No dramatic scene. Only the raw truth of a woman who had survived, and a man who had finally realized what he had abandoned. "I'm not here to make excuses," he said. I saw them, and I couldn't walk away." Julia looked down at her sons, who were still staring up at this stranger with identical eyes. Something inside her softened slightly. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But curiosity. A door she thought had been sealed shut cracked just enough for air to pass through. "Then don't walk away," she said. "But don't think for a second that this will be easy." Tyler nodded, and for the first time since that morning 3 years ago, Julia felt the power shift back into her hands. She didn't know what would happen next. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Tyler didn't disappear this time. The next day, Julia found him waiting across the street from the daycare center, standing awkwardly near the bus stop, clearly unsure whether he had the right to even speak to her. She didn't acknowledge him at first, focusing on getting the twins inside, making sure their backpacks were zipped, their shoes were tied, and their lunchboxes were safely packed. But she knew he was watching. And part of her wanted him to. As soon as the boys ran inside and the door shut behind them, she walked straight toward him. He didn't speak immediately. He simply looked at her like someone memorizing every detail, perhaps to make up for 3 years of forgetting. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You don't get to just show up and pretend this didn't happen," she said. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. I don't want to pretend. I want to face it." They sat in a small coffee shop around the corner, the same one she had gone to 100 times while pregnant, often sitting by the window and wondering if he would ever walk through the door again. Now he had. But nothing about this was comforting. It felt like reopening a wound that had barely scabbed. He told her everything, or at least what he claimed was everything. That the night he left, he'd had a panic attack so intense he thought he was dying. That he had booked a flight to Panama the next morning and stayed there for nearly a year, hiding in business deals and boardrooms, trying to erase the image of her face when he walked out. That he thought about coming back 100 times, but always convinced himself he didn't deserve to. That only recently he'd started trying to fix what he had ruined, not just with her, but with himself. Julia listened, not because she wanted to comfort him, but because she needed to understand how someone could love you one day and abandon you the next. She studied his face as he spoke, the lines around his eyes deeper now, a scar on his chin she didn't remember. She didn't know if he was telling the truth, but he didn't seem like the same man. Not polished. Not untouchable. Just broken in a way she recognized. And that scared her more than if he had come back full of arrogance and money. He asked if he could meet the boys again, properly this time. She hesitated. Every part of her mother's instinct screamed to protect them. But she also remembered how they had looked at him in the park, how easily they had accepted him as something familiar. She finally said yes, with strict boundaries. Supervised. No gifts. No lies. He agreed instantly, as if he'd prepared himself for worse. The first visit was awkward. They met at a local children's museum where the boys could run around and explore while Julia sat nearby like a hawk. Tyler was gentle, hesitant, asking questions about what they liked, what scared them, who their favorite superheroes were. Liam was reserved, clinging to Julia's side at first, while Lucas dove into conversation with no fear. Tyler knelt beside them during a space exhibit and listened as Lucas explained how he wanted to be an astronaut, not just because of the stars, but because astronauts never leave their team. That simple, innocent comment hit Tyler visibly. He didn't cry, but Julia could see it. That crack of guilt. That realization. He didn't try to defend himself or promise the world. He just nodded and said, "That's a good dream. I hope you do it." Over the next few weeks, they met a few more times, the zoo, a science fair, even a quiet evening at Julia's apartment where they baked cookies and spilled half the flour on the floor. Tyler didn't act like a hero. He acted like a man trying to earn back something he knew he might never fully receive. And that mattered. One night after the boys had gone to bed, Julia and Tyler stood in the kitchen cleaning up. She handed him a towel without saying much. The silence between them was no longer hostile, but it still carried weight. "You're good with them," she said finally, not looking at him. He wiped his hands and leaned against the counter. "They're incredible. You did all of this. I can't take credit for anything." "You're right," she said, turning to face him. "You can't." He nodded again, not arguing, not defending. That, in itself, was new. Then came the question she didn't expect to ask but had been forming for weeks. Why now? Why not 2 years ago? Why not when I gave birth? His answer wasn't rehearsed. Because I was still a coward. And because I thought they were better off not knowing a man like me. But then I saw them. I saw you. And it hit me that maybe what's best for them isn't just a perfect life, it's the truth. Even if it's messy. Even if it's me trying, failing, and trying again. Julia didn't forgive him that night. She didn't let him stay. But something shifted. She believed he meant it. She still didn't know if he deserved a place in their lives, but for the first time in years, she stopped seeing him as a ghost of what she'd lost, and started seeing him as a man trying to earn a place in the family he abandoned. Whether or not he would ever truly belong was still uncertain. But she knew this much: she would never let him hurt her boys. And she would never allow herself to be broken again. Tyler had returned to a world that had learned how to live without him. If he wanted to stay, he would have to learn to live in it too, on their terms, not his. As the months passed, Tyler became a quiet but steady presence in Liam and Lucas's lives. He never tried to force himself into their routines, never insisted on being called Dad, and never acted like he was owed anything. Instead, he asked Julia for permission every step of the way, if he could take them for ice cream, attend a school event, or come to the park on Saturdays. She never gave him an easy yes. Trust wasn't something she could afford to give blindly anymore. But the boys, slowly and cautiously, began to open their hearts to him. Lucas was the first. His curiosity had always been stronger than his fear, and within weeks he was talking about his dreams, asking Tyler questions about his job, and drawing pictures of our family that included a tall stick figure with brown hair and blue dots for eyes. Liam was harder. He stayed quiet during visits, holding Julia's hand tightly, watching Tyler with a look that said he remembered more than a child his age should. But even he began to soften after Tyler showed up to his school's library day dressed in a wrinkled superhero t-shirt, pretending not to be embarrassed as he sat on the tiny carpet reading picture books aloud to a room full of second graders. That day, Liam let go of Julia's hand and sat next to him. He didn't say a word, but Julia noticed the way his little body leaned into Tyler's side by the end of the story. Julia herself remained a fortress. She was polite, composed, and careful. She listened when Tyler spoke. She thanked him when he helped. But she never gave him more than the moment required. At night, when the boys were asleep, she would lie awake in her narrow bed and replay old memories like distant films, Tyler kissing her neck in the morning, the way he used to laugh when he tripped over his own shoes, the promises whispered in the dark that now felt like lies. But what haunted her most wasn't the betrayal. It was the ache of what could have been if he hadn't run. One evening in late autumn, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, Julia invited Tyler to the boys' birthday party. It was small, just a few friends from school and neighbors, but she knew it would mean something to the twins. Tyler arrived with a gift that wasn't flashy or expensive, just a handmade photo album, the first few pages filled with recent pictures he had taken of the boys at the park, the zoo, even from library day. The rest of the pages were blank, waiting to be filled. Julia didn't say anything when he handed it to her, but she traced her fingers along the cover later that night and felt a crack form in the wall she had built so carefully. Later that week, Lucas got sick. A bad fever, coughing fits, and sleepless nights. Julia stayed up with him while Tyler took care of Liam, cooking meals, washing dishes, and reading to him so he wouldn't feel left out. For the first time since Tyler's return, Julia found herself not just tolerating his presence, but depending on it. One night, she fell asleep on the couch, completely worn out. When she woke in the early morning light, she found a blanket draped over her, a hot cup of tea on the coffee table, and a note that simply said, "I've got them. Rest." Something shifted in her after that. She didn't say it aloud, but her posture toward him changed. She stopped looking for the exit in every conversation, stopped checking her watch every time he arrived, stopped holding her breath when the boys talked about him as if he had always been there. She even laughed once, truly laughed, when he tried to assemble a toy shelf without instructions and ended up trapped beneath a pile of screws and uneven wood panels. Tyler froze when he heard the sound, his eyes searching hers for what it meant, but Julia turned away quickly. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something else. One Sunday morning, as they all sat around the kitchen table eating pancakes Liam had helped flip, Tyler looked up and asked if he could take the boys for a day trip to the coast. Julia hesitated, her fork midair, unsure if she was ready. He didn't pressure her. He simply said, "You're welcome to come too. Or not. Whatever feels right. I just want to give them something good." She looked at the boys, Lucas with syrup on his cheek, Liam building a pancake tower, and something inside her unclenched. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "But no junk food, no scary stories, and you text me every hour." Tyler smiled, and for the first time since their collision in the park, there was something between them that resembled peace. That day at the coast was filled with wind, laughter, and sand in every shoe. The boys ran along the shore collecting seashells, Tyler carried them on his shoulders through the surf, and Julia found herself watching from the edge with something she hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. Not in the romantic sense. Not yet. But in the way that made her think maybe broken things didn't stay broken forever. Maybe, sometimes, they just came back together in pieces you didn't expect, in ways that looked different but still worked. Tyler wasn't the same man he used to be. And Julia wasn't the same woman he had left behind. But here they were, together again, not because of a perfect ending, but because they had chosen not to give up. Not on the boys. Not on themselves. And maybe, just maybe, not on each other. Winter arrived slowly, cloaking the town in early darkness and quiet evenings, and with it came an unspoken rhythm between Julia and Tyler that neither of them dared to define. He became a fixture in their lives, not always visible, but always present, always offering help without demanding closeness, and slowly, Julia found herself letting him in more than she had ever planned to. He began picking the boys up from school twice a week, bringing them snacks he had learned to pack himself, simple things like sliced apples and peanut butter crackers, and when the twins came home, they would tell her every little detail, how Tyler had helped them finish a puzzle in the school library, how he taught them a trick with a paper airplane, how he never checked his phone once while they talked. Julia listened, nodding, sometimes smiling, sometimes silent, but always wondering when this new calm would break. And then it did. Not because of anything he did wrong, but because of everything he had once failed to do. It started with a letter. A glossy envelope in the mailbox with Tyler's full name embossed in gold. She opened it in the kitchen, already expecting trouble, and she wasn't wrong. It was an invitation to a charity gala, addressed to him and one Miss Julia Hart, with a note scribbled at the bottom in familiar handwriting, his mother's. Julia froze. Her name, written so casually by a woman who had once told her she wasn't good enough, who hadn't reached out once during her pregnancy or after the boys were born, who had let her vanish from their lives as if she were a mistake. She felt the old rage surface again, cold and sharp. When Tyler arrived that evening, she handed him the envelope without a word. He read it quickly and looked up, already defensive. "I didn't know she sent that," he said. "I swear. I haven't spoken to her since." Julia held up her hand, stopping him. "It doesn't matter. I'm not going." He didn't argue, but the tension was there, hanging between them like thick fog. Over dinner, the boys chattered about a school holiday show they were rehearsing for, and Tyler listened intently, laughing at the right parts, asking questions about their costumes, but Julia could see that his mind was elsewhere. So was hers. Later, after the twins were asleep, she stood by the sink washing dishes while he dried them, the silence between them heavier than usual. "I didn't tell her about you," he finally said. "Not because I'm ashamed, but because I didn't know how to explain what I did to you. I still don't." Julia didn't answer. She wanted to scream, to say that he should have done better, sooner, louder. But instead, she said, "You don't have to explain it to her. You have to explain it to them. One day, they'll ask why you weren't there. And you'd better have something better than, 'I was scared.'" The following week brought more than cold weather, it brought an emergency. Lucas fell during recess, fracturing his wrist, and Julia rushed to the hospital alone, panic making her hands shake as she filled out forms and tried to keep her son calm. But Tyler arrived 20 minutes later, still in a suit, tie askew, his face pale. He didn't ask permission. He just walked in, took Lucas's other hand, and stayed. He cracked jokes softly to distract him during the X-ray, helped Julia talk to the doctor, and bought every flavor of juice from the vending machine when Lucas couldn't decide. That night, when Julia finally got home with her sleepy, bandaged son, she found a message on her phone from Tyler. "I'm proud of how strong he was. You did that. And I'll keep showing up until he sees I can be strong too." She didn't reply, but she saved the message. Something inside her had begun to shift again. Not out of romance, not out of nostalgia, but out of respect for the man he was slowly becoming. She still remembered the pain. She still woke up sometimes from dreams of that day he left, the silence he left in his place, the first time she held both babies in her arms and wondered how she would ever make it through. But now, when she looked at Tyler sitting on the floor building Lego castles with the boys, or helping them zip their jackets, or carrying them to bed when they fell asleep on the couch, she saw more than a man trying to make amends. She saw a father learning, slowly and without shortcuts, how to be what they needed. One night, after the boys had fallen asleep watching a movie, Julia stood in the hallway and watched as Tyler gently lifted one twin into each arm and carried them to bed without waking them. He covered them carefully, kissed their foreheads, and stood still for a moment, just watching. When he turned and saw her, he didn't flinch. He just whispered, "I know I can't go back and fix it. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again." Julia didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look on her face said it all. She wasn't ready to forgive him yet. But for the first time, she believed he meant it when he said he was staying. And for now, that was enough. Spring arrived with the gentleness of a long-overdue apology. The snow melted slowly, giving way to patches of green grass, budding trees, and the sound of children's laughter returning to the streets. With it came change, not dramatic or sudden, but the kind that slips in quietly and only reveals itself when you realize something feels lighter. Julia found herself smiling more often, not because everything was perfect, but because the weight she had carried alone for so long was finally being shared. Tyler continued to show up, not just in grand gestures but in the quiet moments, the ones that truly mattered. He started volunteering at the boys' school once a week, helping with science projects and reading groups, and even though Julia never asked him to, he always texted her photos and updates, sometimes just a picture of Liam concentrating on his paper or Lucas proudly holding up a drawing of their family, which now included Tyler without explanation. It was the boys who decided that part, and she didn't argue with them. There was a new rhythm now, one that included Tyler in their mornings and evenings, in the rush of breakfast and the calm of bedtime stories. Julia had fought so hard not to rely on anyone that it felt almost unnatural to let herself lean on him, even just a little. But there were days when she forgot to pick up milk or was late coming home, and he was already there, making dinner or helping with homework, never pointing it out, never making her feel less for not doing it all alone. She started to see the difference between someone who offered support out of guilt and someone who offered it out of love, and Tyler, for all his flaws and regrets, was choosing the latter. Still, their relationship remained undefined. There were no confessions, no promises, no whispered declarations late at night. Julia wouldn't let herself go there, not yet. But there were glances that lasted too long, moments when their hands brushed and neither pulled away, conversations that drifted into silence not because they lacked words but because the words were waiting to be earned. One Sunday, after a long day at the park, Julia found herself sitting on the porch steps beside him while the boys played with chalk on the sidewalk. The sun was setting, casting gold across the trees, and for a moment it felt like a memory that hadn't happened yet. Tyler turned to her, his voice quiet, as if afraid to break the spell. "Do you ever think we could try again? Not now. Just someday?" Julia didn't look at him right away. She watched her sons laugh in the driveway, drawing rockets and hearts and stick figures that looked suspiciously like the four of them. She took a breath, steady and slow. "I think we already are. Just in a different way." She didn't say it to give him hope, and he didn't take it that way. He nodded, understanding that what they were building wasn't a second chance at a love story, it was the first draft of a new kind of family, one built not on idealism but on effort, on hard conversations and everyday acts of trust. That week, Lucas brought home a drawing from school that showed a house, for smiling figures, and a sun with a giant heart around it. When Julia asked what it was, he said, "It's our home. And that's Daddy." He pointed to the tallest figure. Then, he added, almost like it was obvious, "He came back, so now we don't have to draw him far away anymore." It broke something in her, something she hadn't realized was still holding tight. That night, after the boys were asleep, she sat on the edge of her bed holding the drawing in her lap, staring at it like it was a message she'd waited years to receive. She realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being hurt. Not of repeating the past. She was afraid of missing the future by clinging too tightly to what had already happened. So she called Tyler, asked if he could come by the next day, not for anything urgent, just because. When he showed up, nervous as always, she handed him the drawing without a word. He looked at it, blinked a few times, then looked at her, eyes shining with something deeper than gratitude. "They see me," he said softly. "They trust me." Julia nodded. "They do. And maybe I'm starting to as well." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a reunion wrapped in fireworks. But it was the first time she let him sit beside her on the couch while the boys slept, the first time their shoulders touched without her pulling away, the first time silence between them felt like peace instead of distance. They sat there for a long time, saying nothing, but understanding everything. In that quiet, Julia realized that healing didn't come with a finish line. It came in the form of small choices repeated every day, the choice to stay, to show up, to forgive without forgetting, and to believe that some things, even after being broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. Summer returned like a quiet miracle, soft and golden, and with it came a sense of ease that Julia hadn't felt in years. It had been nearly 12 months since Tyler had first reappeared in their lives, a man full of apologies and uncertainty, but now he was no longer a visitor standing at the edge of her world, he had become part of it, slowly and deliberately, without forcing his way in. Their lives had folded into each other's in the smallest and most meaningful ways, shared grocery lists pinned on the fridge, laughter over burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings, silent teamwork as they wrangled the twins into bedtime routines and soccer cleats. There were still days of doubt, moments when Julia caught herself bracing for him to vanish again, but those moments grew further apart as Tyler continued to stay, always with quiet consistency and a humility that never demanded praise. The boys had changed, too. They no longer referred to Tyler with hesitation or uncertainty. Now, he was simply Dad, a word that had once felt foreign and now rolled off their tongues like it had always belonged there. Julia watched it happen gradually, the way they began running to him first when scraped knees needed tending, the way they asked if he could come to parent-teacher night or sleepovers or field trips. She watched him grow into that role, not perfectly, not without awkward stumbles, but with a sincerity that made her heart ache. He never tried to replace the years he had missed, never pretended they hadn't happened. Instead, he focused on the moments he could be there for, and made sure not to waste a single one. As for Julia, her healing had never been loud. It was a slow thaw, a dismantling of the armor she had worn for so long it had nearly fused with her skin. But now, as the summer sun warmed the walls of the little house they shared part-time, she began to allow herself the luxury of imagining a future again, one not defined by survival, but by joy, by choice. She hadn't forgotten what he did. She never would. But the pain no longer controlled her. It had become something else, something she had learned to live with, something that made her stronger rather than smaller. One afternoon, as they prepared for the boys' end-of-school celebration, Julia stood in the kitchen watching Tyler struggle to tie two tiny matching bow ties, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration while Liam giggled and Lucas tried to hold still. The scene was so absurdly ordinary, so deeply domestic, that Julia had to look away for a moment, overwhelmed by the quiet truth of how far they had come. Later that evening, after the party, after the kids had fallen asleep with sticky fingers and frosting-smeared cheeks, Tyler joined her on the back porch, where she sat with a glass of lemonade, the air filled with the hum of crickets and far-off laughter from neighboring houses. He sat beside her without speaking, and for a long time, they just listened to the night. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket and handed her something, a small folded note, old and yellowed at the edges. Julia recognized it immediately. It was the letter he had left behind all those years ago, the one he had written when he walked out of her life. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it, the weight of that memory pressing down on her chest. She read it slowly, the words just as painful now as they had been then, but somehow less sharp. When she finished, she looked up at him. He said nothing, only watched her with the same expression he always wore when he wasn't sure he deserved to be in the room. "I never wanted to read it again," she said quietly. "I thought if I did, I'd start hating you all over." Tyler looked down at his hands. "I've hated myself enough for both of us. But I wanted you to have it again, not to forgive me, but because I need you to know I've never stopped regretting it." She folded the note slowly and placed it on the table beside her. "I believe you," she said. "But I also need you to understand something. Regret doesn't rebuild a life. Showing up does. Staying does. Every single day." He nodded, and the silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was full of everything they hadn't said, everything they no longer needed to say out loud. Weeks passed, and then one day, Julia found herself staring at a lease renewal form for her apartment, fingers hovering above the signature line. The boys were at Tyler's for the weekend, a normal arrangement that no longer felt strange, and the house was too quiet. She walked through it slowly, taking in the crayon marks on the wall she had never scrubbed away, the dent in the floor where Lucas had dropped his first science fair volcano, the collection of shoes by the door that were now too small but never thrown out. And she realized she was tired, not of the house, but of the split life they had been managing. She missed them when they were gone. She missed him too. It scared her, that realization. But it didn't stop her. That night, she called Tyler and asked him to come over. He did, almost instantly, still in his work clothes and looking as nervous as he had the day they ran into each other outside the school. She handed him the lease renewal and waited. His eyes moved across the paper slowly, then back to her. "What does this mean?" he asked. Julia met his gaze. "It means maybe we're done pretending this isn't working. It means maybe you shouldn't just be visiting your sons on weekends." He blinked, stunned, not quite smiling yet. "Are you sure?" She stepped closer. "No. But I think I'm ready to try." And just like that, the wall that had divided them for so long finally came down, not with fireworks, not with sweeping declarations, but with two people choosing to begin again in the place where everything had once broken. Tyler didn't kiss her that night. He didn't have to. The boys woke up the next morning to find him in the kitchen making waffles, and Julia pouring orange juice beside him, her hand brushing his as she passed the plates. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. It was theirs. And it was enough.